Welcome back to Strange Truths and Tall Tales, the product of Newfoundland podcast. This is the place for anyone who's into Newfoundland stories, history, and culture. I'm Robert, your host and guide through the curious, the legendary, and the downright strange. You might know me from my writing at Product of Newfoundland, where I dive deep into the stories of this foggy island. Here at the podcast, I bring those stories to life, from folklore to forgotten truths to quirky traditions and fun pop culture. There's bound to be something here for you. Today, we're going back to the early hours of October 14th, 1942, a night that would change the lives of many forever. It's a story of terror, bravery, and resilience. It's the tale of the wartime sinking of the Newfoundland ferry, SS Caribou. You're traveling through the fog, and just ahead is an island of mermaids, miracles, and monsters. Your next stop, Newfoundland, and these are its strange truths and tall tales. On the evening of October 13th, 1942, the SS Caribou prepared to set sail from Sydney, Nova Scotia to Basques, Newfoundland. The ferry had been making this trip across the Gulf of St. Lawrence for over a decade, serving as a vital link between Newfoundland and mainland Canada. But this was no ordinary crossing. World War II had cast a long shadow over the North Atlantic, and everyone aboard the Caribou knew the dangers lurking beneath the waves. German U-boats patrolled the waters, preying on Allied vessels, and merchant ships had become frequent targets. For civilians, the risk was unsettling, but there was little choice. The ferry was the only way home, and wartime travel had become a fact of life. That night, 237 people were aboard the Caribou, a mix of military personnel, civilians, and families, including 11 children. Some of those aboard were soldiers returning to Newfoundland for leave. Others were mothers and their young children traveling to reunite with loved ones. The crew, many of whom were from Basques, carried out their duties with practiced efficiency. But even they couldn't ignore the growing tension surrounding wartime travel. Despite the dangers, safety measures were limited. Passengers were told to familiarize themselves with the locations of lifeboats, a grim necessity in case of attack. Some took the warning seriously, taking notes of the exits and life jackets, while others reassured themselves that the Caribou had made this crossing safely before. After all, the ferry had an escort, the HMCS Grande Mer, a Royal Canadian minesweeper tasked with protecting the ferry from enemy submarines. The Grande Mer, under the command of Lieutenant James Cuthbert, followed the Caribou from behind, scanning the dark waters for any signs of trouble. The weather that night was heavy and foreboding. There was no moonlight to guide the way, just a deep expanse of inky blackness. To Cuthbert, the darkness was a double-edged sword. While it provided some cover from enemy eyes, it also made it nearly impossible to spot a lurking U-boat until it was too late. He had another concern too, the smoke. Thick black plumes rising from the Caribou's funnel. The ship's coal-fired engines produced a telltale trail that stood out even against the black night sky. It was a beacon that could be spotted miles away. It was a concern that weighed heavily on the minds of those who understood the risk. If a German submarine was nearby, the smoke could betray their location. But for now, the passengers and the crew tried to settle in for the night. Some found a spot to sleep, while others gathered in the lounge, quietly chatting or playing cards to pass the time. Children clung to their mothers, their small faces weary from the long journey. Few aboard realized that in just a few hours, their voyage would turn into one of the greatest tragedies in Newfoundland's wartime history. Somewhere, in the darkness, there was an enemy watching. At 3:21 a.m., many of the passengers of the SS Caribou were asleep, unaware that their worst fears were about to become reality. Lurking beneath the frigid waters of the Gulf of St. Lawrence was German U-boat U-69, commanded by Ulrich Graf. The submarine had been patrolling these waters for days, searching for enemy vessels to strike. That night it had spotted a heavy trail of black smoke rising against the dark sky, an unmistakable sign of a steam-powered ship. The Caribou, with its coal-fired engines, had unknowingly given away its position. But the U-69's crew didn't realize they were targeting a passenger's ferry. In the darkness, they misidentified the Caribou as a 6,500-ton freighter, a valuable military target. Even more concerning, they mistook the HMCS Grande Mer trailing behind the ferry for a two-stacked destroyer. The U-boat's crew believed they had come across a strategic Allied convoy. To them, this seemed like an opportunity too good to pass up. For nearly 20 minutes, U-69 maneuvered into position, carefully lining up its attack. Then, at 3:40 a.m., it happened. A single torpedo was launched from the submarine's bow, striking through the cold Atlantic waters towards its unsuspecting target. Within moments, the torpedo slammed into the Caribou's starboard side, detonating with a deafening explosion. The force of the blast ripped through the hull, tearing open a massive hole and sending a shockwave of destruction through the vessel. The impact was instant and catastrophic. The explosion obliterated the engine room, knocking out the ship's power and plunging it into darkness. Inside, passengers were thrown from their bunks, crashing into walls and floors as the ship violently lurched to one side. The force of the blast sent scalding steam and debris shooting through the corridors, and within seconds, water began rushing into the gaping wound in the ship's hull. Above deck, chaos erupted. Crew members desperately tried to launch the lifeboats, but in the confusion, many passengers, some disoriented and injured, struggled to find their way topside. Parents clung to their children, trying to keep their footing on the sharply listing deck. Some had been awakened by the explosion and rushed from their cabins in terror, still dressed in nightclothes. Others, caught below deck, fought through flooding hallways and debris, desperate for escape. The Caribou had been mortally wounded. There was no hope of saving her. The passengers and crew only had minutes to escape before the ferry, Newfoundland's lifeline across the Gulf, slipped beneath the waves. Survivor Lorenzo Goss of Grand Falls later described the panic that erupted on board.
People, not knowing where their lifeboats were, not even knowing how to reach the deck, surged about. They ran into each other. They fell over broken furniture, glass, or scattered suitcases and soldiers' kits. Some reached the deck. Cries of those facing death in the darkness seemed to come from all sections, striking terror to nearly everyone.
In the confusion, many passengers had no idea where to go. Some couldn't find the lifeboats at all, and others were trapped below deck as the ship rapidly took on water. The Caribou was quickly sinking. Lieutenant James Cuthbert of the HMCS Grande Mer wasted no time. The moment the Caribou was struck, he ordered full speed ahead, determined to hunt down the enemy vessel that had just condemned hundreds of innocent lives to the sea. But U-69 had already begun its escape, still convinced that the Grande Mer was a heavily armed destroyer. Graf made a split-second decision. He ordered the U-boat to dive immediately. The Grande Mer rushed to the scene, dropping a spread of depth charges into the water, hoping to destroy the submarine before it could slip away. Explosions rocked the ocean's surface, sending columns of water high into the air. But beneath the waves, U-69 maneuvered skillfully, dodging the blasts and taking refuge in the least expected place, directly beneath the survivors of the Caribou. It was a ruthless gamble, but a calculated one. The crew of U-69 was betting that the Grande Mer wouldn't risk another attack with so many men, women, and children struggling in the freezing water above, and they were right. Forced to make an impossible choice, Lieutenant Cuthbert called off the attack. He could not risk further loss of life. Helplessly, he watched as U-69 slipped away into the darkness, vanishing into the depths of the Atlantic. Now, at 6:30 a.m., 2 hours after the torpedo struck, the Grande Mer turned its full attention to the unfolding tragedy. The Caribou was already gone, swallowed by the sea in just minutes. All that remained were the desperate cries of survivors, men, women, and children clinging to the wreckage, fighting to stay afloat in the frigid waters. Among the survivors of the Caribou's sinking was Saskatchewan-born Sub-Lieutenant Margaret Brooke, a nursing sister in the Royal Canadian Navy. She was not a soldier, but on that terrible night she would display extraordinary courage in the face of unimaginable horror. Margaret was traveling with her close friend and fellow nursing sister, Agnes Wilkie. Like the other passengers, they had been jolted awake by the thunderous explosions of the torpedo. The ship lurched violently, and the two women scrambled for their life vests before forcing their way onto the deck. But outside, chaos reigned. Panicked passengers shoved and stumbled in the darkness, their terrified screams lost in the roar of the sea. Before they could react, the Caribou began its final descent. The sinking ship dragged Margaret and Agnes under, pulling them into the freezing depths of the North Atlantic. Later, in a letter to her brother, Margaret Brooke described those terrifying moments.
How we got away from her, I don't know, but we clung together somehow all the time we were under, and when we finally reached the surface, we managed to grab a piece of wreckage and cling to that.
Miraculously, the two women resurfaced and found themselves clinging to an overturned lifeboat. Around them, other survivors struggled against the icy water, desperately searching for anything to keep them afloat. But time was against them. The freezing temperatures began to take their toll. Wilkie grew weaker, shivering violently as hypothermia set in. Margaret held on to her friend, trying to keep her conscious, urging her to stay awake, but the cold was merciless. Agnes eventually slipped into unconsciousness in Margaret's arms. Helpless to save her, Margaret could only cling to her lifeless friend, refusing to let go. As dawn broke over the Atlantic, a powerful wave crashed over them. The surge wrenched Agnes from Margaret's grasp, and before she could react, her friend was gone, claimed by the sea. Margaret Brooke survived. She was eventually rescued and brought aboard the Grande Mère, but she would carry the weight of that night with her for the rest of her life. For her heroic attempt to save Agnes Wilkie, Margaret Brooke was later awarded the Member of the Order of the British Empire, an honor recognizing her extraordinary bravery in the face of overwhelming tragedy. Of the 237 on board, only 101 survived. Among those who perished were military personnel, civilians, and children. Entire families were virtually wiped out in an instant. In Port Basque, the grief was palpable. The community had lost many of its own. After the sinking, there was much outrage, especially since a passenger ferry filled with civilians and children had been the target. Editorials from across Canada condemned the act as a senseless crime of war. Yet it steeled the resolve of many. As one editorial in St. John's put it,
"It will have no effect upon the course of the war, except to steel our resolve that the Nazi blot on humanity must be eliminated from our world."
After the Caribou disaster, U-69 continued its deadly patrols in the North Atlantic. The German submarine had already made a name for itself as a formidable predator, and its reign of terror was not over. On October 20th, 1942, just weeks after the Caribou tragedy, U-69 struck again. This time, its target was the SS Rosecastle, an iron ore freighter bound for Sydney, Nova Scotia. The torpedo was a dud, and the Rosecastle escaped, though would later be sunk off Bell Island in a separate U-boat attack. But the hunters would soon become the hunted. In February 1943, just months after the Caribou, U-69 met its end. The submarine was detected and engaged by a British destroyer in the North Atlantic. U-69 was sunk with all 46 crew members aboard. The very same submarine that had caused so much death and devastation in the waters off Newfoundland and beyond have now joined its victims in the depth of the ocean. The SS Caribou's tragic fate is one of the darkest chapters in Newfoundland's history. A reminder that the war wasn't something happening across the ocean. It reached right into the lives of civilians in Newfoundland and Labrador. Children died from enemy actions right here at home. The tragedy would not be forgotten. In 1986, Marine Atlantic introduced a new ferry, the MV Caribou, named in honor of the original vessel. On its inaugural voyage, it made a solemn stop near the site of the sinking, where a wreath was cast into the sea, a tribute to those lost on that fateful night. For the survivors, the memories of October 14, 1942 never faded. Their stories of fear, loss, and incredible bravery became woven into Newfoundland's wartime story. Among them, Margaret Brooke's courage stood out. In the face of freezing waters and impossible odds, she had held on, not just to life, but to hope. Not only was she awarded the MBE, decades later, in 2016, on her 100th birthday, the Royal Canadian Navy honored her once more. A new Arctic patrol ship was commissioned in her name, the HMCS Margaret Brooke, ensuring that her story of bravery and sacrifice would never be forgotten. And it hasn't been. The story of the SS Caribou is one of tragedy and resilience, a testament to the ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. It serves as a stark reminder of the cost of war, not just on the battlefield, but in the lives of civilians, families, and those simply trying to make a journey home. Yet, even in the face of devastation, it is also a story of courage, of those who fought to survive, of those who risked everything to save others, and of the bravery that endures even in the darkest moments. The sinking of the SS Caribou remains etched into Newfoundland's history, a solemn tribute to the lives lost and the resilience of those who lived to tell the tale. The sinking of the SS Caribou was more than just a wartime tragedy. It was a deeply personal loss for the families of the 130 plus people who never made it home. Each name on the casualty list belonged to someone with a story, dreams, and loved ones left behind. Newfoundland folk musician Tyler Humby brings those stories to life through song. His debut single, The Caribou, blends fact and fiction to capture the human side of history, telling the tale of two lovers aboard the doomed ferry on the night of its tragic sinking. With this song, Tyler reminds us that behind every historical event are real people, people with hopes, fears, and futures that were suddenly cut short. Since launching his career in 2023, Tyler has quickly made a name for himself in the Newfoundland music scene, performing regularly across the province. He placed second in the 2024 Newfound Talent Contest and is currently studying in the Applied Music program at College in the North Atlantic. Today, he joins me to talk about his journey as a musician, his love for storytelling through song, and the inspiration behind The Caribou. Welcome, Tyler.
Thank you so much for having me.
Um, I'd like to jump right into the Newfound Talent Contest. What was that contest?
So the Newfound Talent Contest, it certainly grew the year that I did it last year. Originally, I think it was just kind of it was just a showcase, I guess, for youth talent. It was a one night event, and a set amount of musicians, kind of like youth musicians, entered the contest, and the best of that night won a group of prizes. I'm not sure what it was back in the day, but last year they exploded and they did a bunch of regionals all throughout the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. And I happened to win the Conception Bay South regionals, and we went on to the finals where nine of us competed at the LSPU Hall to a sold out show, and it was a wonderful experience. I got to meet a pile of new friends who are wonderful musicians, and I made some connections there. And just having that as an experience under my belt was really cool. To be in a real professional venue with a sold out show was really fun.
You mentioned there youth musicians, and what listeners might not know just by listening to you is you're a pretty young guy.
Yeah, so I just turned 19 this year. So last year was my last year to kind of compete in it. It's an 18 and under competition, so it's really narrowed in towards the youth demographic of the musicians in our province, and to kind of showcase them, or us, I guess you could say, to kind of really give it a really give us a name, and not just the adult musicians that we all know and love, of course, but to kind of give us a chance to shine as well.
I think anybody who's listened to your new single, The Caribou, is not at all surprised that you did so well because it's such a great song. Um, it is, of course, as we just said, about the sinking of the SS Caribou in 1942. Um, what about that event inspired you to make a song?
it, it's kind of a half a funny story. So um I didn't overly know about the caribou. I think my grandparents mentioned it somewhere in my wee years. But um, it really, I was sitting at work one day, and a lot of people don't really do much in their downtime at work, right? So I was just kind of chilling, and I looked on the computer, and an ad from CBC kind of showed up, and the caribou was on the front page. I was like, that's, what, that's, I haven't really heard about that boat before. Let's look into it. And then I I got I got a little bit of undiagnosed ADHD, so well, when I looked at it, that was it. Then I went full spiral right down into it. I had to dig into the depths of it, and I found it such an intriguing story. And I found out afterwards that I was one of the ones that were kind of a little bit uneducated when it came to that part of history, and a lot of people do know about the Caribou. But at that point, I was like, it would be really nice to kind of spread this history and bring it back to life and modernize it a little bit. So I thought, what would it be like from a couple's point of view on this boat, for one to make it off and one to not make it off. So I created a couple characters and made a song about it. But I will say, the entirety of the song, besides those characters, even down to the time of the morning, is 100% true. Besides the characters, of course.
Anybody who's listened to this podcast and just heard the story of the caribou will see how your song sticks pretty close to what happened. So why did you decide to create characters for the song?
Mostly because I didn't want to dig into, some people could have past traumas dealing with that, losing family members. So I didn't really want to dig into the personal lives of anybody to look at very like a 100% authentic true story. So I figured I'd do that much and kind of create that. But I did have a couple reach out to me, um, after the song was released, saying that they were the relatives of somebody on the ship, and it just so happened that, this person died on the ship, and their wife, was the only one that was left, was the only one that made it off the ship, and died later on, due to heartbreak. So that was really cool to see that, those characters even though I created them, was still kind of truthful in its own way.
Oh, for sure. Even if they weren't historically accurate people, I think what you tapped in, there's a truth to the story that you're telling, right? And and sometimes creating a character allows you to get in there in a different way, maybe. I
Yeah,
don't know. I say that as somebody who writes a blog who creates characters all the time to tell about historic events, so I kind of believe it's okay. You mentioned earlier about not really knowing a lot about the caribou, and I think that's totally fair. I mean, I think a lot of Newfoundlanders sort of know it happened, but I don't think we give. I mean, it was a pretty serious event, a pretty grave happening in the war, and I don't think, considering how awful it was, we really talk about it nearly as much as we could.
yeah, like, as a fellow as young as I am, I just graduated a couple of years ago, and I mean, my teachers will yell at me down the road if I'm wrong, but to the best of my knowledge, we never did learn about that ship. And I mean, I'm not going to stick that into the side of the education system, but just goes to show that there is parts of our history that isn't covered in the curriculum and stuff like that, and that's okay. But yeah, it's certainly a story that isn't told enough as it should be, or as in detail as it should be of what actually happened. Like I do know, a lot of people that know that this ship sank, sometime in World War II, but they don't know how it sank or why it sank or how many people died and how grave of an impact it was.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so we're doing our part to get the story out there.
Yeah.
Um, you've described yourself as a as a storyteller in addition to a songwriter. Do you most of your songs tell stories?
Yeah, so for the most part, all of my original music has been past events, whether historical or personal, that I've experienced or I've looked into. Um, I have a tune. Well, the Caribou is a historical story, but I have another tune called "I Could Never Quit" that is going to be on the. Is it? Oh, never mind. I can't say that part because it's not. I have another original that is not yet, in the mix of being produced. That's a story about a gentleman on a fishing boat, and it's all about, the fact that he's there and he feels like he's stuck. He feels like that's his calling, and he can't get home. And sadly, he passed away on the ship, which is not a true story whatsoever. But it's kind of historical fiction into the traditional aspect of our, like the Newfoundland culture, and what we did back in the day to survive and make money. So, like, there are either that type of stories or like personal events that have happened to me. On the latest record, I have a tune called "Goodbye," which is about the passing of a couple of my uncles that died in a short span, that I was close with. And at that point, my way of grieving was writing music. So it's a story about the type of people that they were. So I guess that's kind of, yeah, to answer the question, yes, I guess I would consider myself a storyteller.
So you mentioned record. You've been recording some things, and we can expect some new material from you throughout the year.
So yeah, so I'm working with Matt Dyes at Hurricane Music, and he just helped me, with the last project with Caribou, and now we're working on a an EP that's we're hoping to be released by late spring, early summer.
Oh, really? So like really soon?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
pretty soon. Hopefully, that's
awesome.
if all things go planned.
Mhm. Awesome. Um, you haven't been uh, well, being that you're only 19, but you haven't been making music all that long, really.
No, so I mean, I've only been playing instruments for the guitar. I've only been playing the guitar for, I think we're in the year three now, for playing the guitar. But for regards of actually getting up on stage and singing, we're for the regards of actually, getting my foot down and really trying at this, we're into year two. So about 2 years of being an unprofessional professional.
So all this songwriting and all this performing has come to you within 2 years?
Yeah, and I have a lot of my friends to thank for that. Really, a lot of them, like, I for the regards of picking up the guitar, I gotta thank my music teacher. I was about three-quarters of the way through grade 11, maybe the first part of grade 12, where she then the school closed for COVID, and she was like, "If anyone wants an instrument, bring it home and let me know." And I was like, "You know what? I'll be bored to death anyway. Let's try and learn the guitar." So I picked that up, and then I had a couple friends that used to write some tunes, and I was like, "Oh, I can. What if I give this a go?" And I wrote a tune, and they were like, "That's actually not half bad," and it kind of went from there.
I find that almost mind-boggling considering where you are now with a song like The Caribou, and considering that uh, 2 years, it just seems an amazing amount of growth in 2 years. Can't wait to see where you go next with that.
Thank you.
So when you started playing guitar, what kind of music did you gravitate to? Was it folk right off the bat?
Yeah, it wasn't so much traditional Newfoundland folk as it is now. That kind of happened. Um, I say later on, but not much later on. I started. I played with a trio in high school, and it was just a simple. My music teacher was like, "You three can sing. Go sing together." And my buddy played the guitar, and when I picked it up, I was like, "Well, you play. Show me some stuff." And he plays a lot of old country and a handful of Newfoundland tunes, but mostly old country music. Johnny Cash, Merle Haggard, Waylon Jennings, those type of guys. So it started off with the classics: Folsom Prison Blues, Big River, um, On the Road Again, Willie Nelson, those type of stuff. But I grew up with a lot of folk music, Sunday morning jigs and reels, Sunday morning Newfoundland show, sorry. So that type of stuff. So it quickly produced to, when I could learn music on my own without having to be showed by a peer. I started, you know, gravitating more towards traditional stuff.
Okay, so if you were going to turn on something on Spotify these days, who would be on your like most played list?
Rum Rabbit, top.
Uh, they would be on my most played list as well.
Yeah,
I was recently watching a video of you opening at the Harborside Park. You were opening for Mick Davis, I think, last summer, and you covered Rum Reggaeton there, I think.
I did. Yeah, I have a few songs of theirs that are staple on my set lists.
Um, you also did. I'm gonna mess up the title of the song now. Longliners of Joe Betts' Arm. Is
Switch it around, but yes, Joe
that
Bats
okay?
Arm
You're
on
right.
Liners.
Joe. Okay, there you go. You made mention. I think you made mention of having a connection to Fogo, or uh, did I misunderstand that? Do you have a connection to Fogo?
So my grandfather is actually from Joe Bats Arm, and he asked me to learn that tune very early on, and I butchered it for a long time until I saw the Craig Young version. And at that point, another one of my idols, Matthew Byrne, I was really studying his style of playing, and it helped me kind of progress myself. So I seen the Craig Young version, and I studied that one and got that one down pretty good. So when I could start playing it good enough that I could play it in front of people, he always said, "Can you play my song? Can you play my tune? You got to play it. You got to play Joe Betts. Can you play my tune?" So that one's at the top. I usually open all of my sets with Joe Bat's Arm Long Liners. Like I said, he's from Joe Bat's, so kind of kind of paying my respects to him. He's still alive. That sounds like he's dead. He's still alive. But paying my respects to my grandfather to kind of open it up with a little hurrah to him.
Cool, cool. You grew up in Clarenville?
I did, yeah. Born and raised.
All right. So what's the music scene like in Clarenville?
Nowhere close to St. John's, I'll tell you that. Uh, my first paid gig was at Shamrock City in Clarenville. So I got to give my respects to them for uh, helping me gain confidence and stage presence. Sadly, that spot was never a booming spot. I can probably count on one hand how many gigs I've played there that have there have been more than 25 people in the bar. But they were my first paid gig. They contacted me and was like, "Hey, I heard you through the jigs and reels." Later, I found out it was one of my English teachers. I heard it through the jigs and reels, and would you like to play a Friday? And kind of went from there. I had pretty much a bi-weekly residency there until they closed down. And from playing empty rooms and just kind of giggling and screwing around with the bartenders and to playing sold out shows and like Paddy's Day, they really helped me get my foot down. But that's pretty much it. After them, I've played. There's a new cocktail lounge opened up. I've played there a few times, and the West Side Charlie's. But that's pretty much the only two bars there now that offer live music.
Okay. I follow you on some social media, and it does seem like you're a pretty busy guy when you have quite a few shows, mostly in St. John's these days.
Yeah, so I live in St. John's for schooling. I'm going to CNA. So I play primarily downtown now. Paddy's Day, the weekend was definitely one of my biggest so far of the year, between playing from St. John's to Petty Harbor. So
Yeah.
that was a pretty intense weekend.
I read you're doing the applied music program at college in the North Atlantic.
Yeah, so the applied music program at CNA, I did a year at MUN doing a science program and realized that as much as I love science, I could not do that for the rest of my days. So I have a lot of my good buddies that did the program, and after a lot of research, we'll say downtown at bars, well, at their house, I should say, because I wasn't old enough. Um, they I kind of give it a go, and I did a bit of research throughout the summer and a lot of talking with a few buddies, like a few big names like well Kelly Loader, who's been nominated for a Juno, is through that program, and Tyler Humber, who is the lead guy for Kitchen Party, is also through that program. Darcy Scott's a good buddy of mine who just graduated, so I know there's been a few big names come from it. So did some research, and just so happened that Wade Pinhorn, the head instructor, was one of my judges at um, at the Newfound Talent. So I looked at it and I was like, "This, I could do this."
How is it shaping your career as a musician?
So this program really teaches you about like again refining your skills per se into a craft and really upgrading yourself as a musician on stage, but also off the stage. Another big part of being in the music industry is the music industry itself. It's not just about being on stage. It's about the background as well, budgeting and creating your shows and bookings and event planning and management, and all the behind the scenes that say once you're big enough, a manager will do. Um, so we have like Wade Pinhorn, who was a world renowned musician, really Juno Award winning musician, and he kind of helps you with the this like say music theory and understanding and stage presence and stuff like that. Like we have a a, um, a a class called performance class, really. So self-explanatory kind of, where we just go in and we get critiqued on our stage presence and how we are on stage and stuff that we can work on. And we work with Scott Hammond, who he was the recording engineer for some of Great Big Sea's albums, and he teaches us about being in the studio and how to work sound equipment and stuff like that. And Michelle Robertson is one of our other instructors, and she's been she managed the once. She's an amazing industry professional. So with that team of instructors, they teach us a lot of things from the sound aspect to how we are on stage to how to navigate through the industry and become successful that way.
Cool, cool. Um, I think folk music, especially folk music in Newfoundland, carries a sense of sort of community and tradition with it. How do you see your music fitting into the broader Newfoundland folk music scene?
Oh, that's a loaded question. Um, I don't know. Um, I I have a love of traditional music. I grew up listening to traditional music my whole life. So I kind of want to bridge the gap between old and new, really. So like creating songs about stories like the Caribou, paying my respects to the past, but also giving a slight modern vibe to a traditional sound. So we have, if that makes sense. So we have like there's accordion, and Eric Hollis is playing the accordion. There's fiddle in it, but then we also have like there's backing vocals in like the bridge part that you don't hear much in traditional music. So I'm I don't know how it'll fit in. I guess I mean I'm too new to kind of really um, make that guess. I suppose right now it's kind of a. I hope they like it.
Listen, I think people are going to like it. It was a difficult question, I think, to answer. I mean, I think while you do definitely fit within a folk genre, you also are uniquely yourself. Um, and I think maybe that's what you're bringing to it. You're bringing you to the folk scene and your own take on folk. I was also sort of wondering, as a younger musician, so much of what we think of as folk, I think, has its roots in the past. But I found myself wondering, what is folk music, or what does folk music look like in the digital age or in the virtual world?
Yeah, that's very true. And I guess you have the like if you think outside of Newfoundland, like you do have guys like Noah Khan, who I would classify as a folk musician. Um, like from a personal perspective, I don't know the actual science behind it, but I think of folk as music of the folk, just kind of really accessible, easy listening music. So instead of things like synths or that type of stuff, folk came from very accessible instruments, stuff you could make. That's why there's not a whole lot of keys in traditional folk music, because you could make a guitar, you could make a fiddle, but it was really hard to make a piano. So it was really accessible. So in the digital age, it's kind of hard to say what it'll be like. But I mean, guitars have been around for eons, and along with other things, and like one big thing about the folk music of our province is a lot of it is passed down orally. It's not so much like I say this to all of my friends. It's one thing I hate about Matthew Burns' music is when I go to learn it, you just got to sit down and listen to it. There's no lyrics. There's no how do you play this? There's no video on YouTube. You just kind of got to sit down and learn it, and that's the beauty of folk. Is it's most times it's very much an oral tradition, and it's passed down, and that's quite sacred. So I don't see that dying anytime soon. So yeah.
No, neither do I. I mean, I think folk music, I don't think you could kill folk music if you wanted to, because I think you're right. I think it's the music of the people, and I think it's always going to resonate. And I think every community is always going to have its own songs and sounds. And we definitely have that here in Newfoundland. And I don't think it's going anywhere. I mean, plus we love it too much.
Oh my God, yes. As Newfoundlanders, we We loves a good do that diddly.
All right. So we've mentioned that you have an EP coming out imminently. Where can people find you these days?
Um, so my music is currently on all streaming platforms. So wherever you listen to your music, really. You can follow me on my socials at Tyler Humby Music. Same tag for all the socials, and you can keep yourself updated there. But for the next couple of weeks, we're keeping it low, going on a vacation, kind of taking some time for myself. Um, but this summer, I got a few festivals lined up that I'm not going to announce yet because they told me not to. Um,
Ooh,
so
that sounds exciting.
um, yeah, so you could follow me on all the socials, and I'll definitely you'll be able to be seeing some updates.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I'd like to thank you so much for joining me, and telling me about your music and letting us all know where we can get it. Um, Looking forward to what's coming in the future, and I hope you have a great day.
Oh, you too, my friend. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, anytime. You want come back when the EP comes out. We'll talk more about Newfoundland folk then.
Oh, sounds grand.
What happened to the SS Caribou was a tragedy, but thanks to storytellers like Tyler Humby, its legacy lives on, not just as a piece of history, but as a story that still resonates today. Through his music, Tyler reminds us that history isn't just dates and events, it's about people, their lives, and the connections they leave behind. It's been great having Tyler on the show, sharing his passion for Newfoundland's past and his journey as a musician. If the Caribou is any sign of what's to come, I think we'll be hearing a lot more from him in the years ahead. Be sure to check out his music. There are links on the Strange Truths and Tall Tales podcast page where you can listen and support his work. And if you love Newfoundland stories, don't forget to visit the Product of Newfoundland blog where you'll find even more fascinating tales. Everything from legendary pirates and weird environmental phenomenon to wild encounters with nature. I've written about all of them really recently. There's always something strange and wonderful to uncover. That's it for today. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to check out Tyler's music. And as always, keep your eye out for more strange truths and tall tales. See you next time.